Every YouTube channel should have some kind of charter, or effectively has some kind of charter, some raison d'etre, I guess would be the word, I don't know. Anyway, this channel, its charter, its objective is to point to that which stands between your experience of peace and alignment with truth, and to help you see it for its non-self nature in a way that leaves you like a bell without a clapper, so to speak. That clapper being the thought I, and the ringing of that bell being suffering. When that I is no longer given the mantle of self, then it's like there's nothing there to be attacked by the world or by thoughts. There's no reaction for lack of identification with one to be affected. Everything is just events. Now, that seems a kind of disassociation that would preclude being functional. But that's not the case, because while there's no identification with the subtle and gross phenomena that was once taken as a self, all of the learning is still intact. All of the cognizing is still intact. There's still functioning. The only experience to which I can point to in this channel that you very likely have not endured is this transition, this full trip of going from being a child to being a serious adult to returning to the state of the child. Not the helplessness of the child, but rather the state of the child. The state of the child would be characterized by a lack of accumulation of memory that gets heaped up into a self in the subtle dimension. Timelines. So the child doesn't have this long timeline. And that timeline is also like a pile of bricks that gets built into a future. And so the child has to have a certain amount of learning and life under their belt to have their energy be spread across the horizontal dimension, that being the conceptual timeline. See, that's where your energy body, how your energy body sits. It's allocated into ideas. In one sense, it's horizontal conceptually in that it goes up and down the timeline. But in another sense, it's like, in reality, it's contained within like a balloon of conditioning, a skin, a shell, if you will, such that the energy body is not perceived. It's rather perceived not directly, but like through a lampshade of conditioning. And of course, that's a unique fingerprint of identity. And so with that identification comes a fear for it. And so it likes overlap. It likes predictability. It likes control. And it holds something back from your experience. And so this channel aims to destroy that. But there's a lot of randomness in the world. There's a lot of weird outcomes that are possible. So I can attempt to point you to the truth through my experience, but spirituality is a jungle, and bad outcomes are possible. Just like in any other sense, bad outcomes are possible. There is kind of a horror of being conscious. There are ways of existing for long periods that are just not pleasant, you know. I suppose that's also something to consider in the bringing of somebody into this world, is the possibility of them having to endure some difficult hand that they've been dealt. And then, of course, assuming you're a person who takes responsibility for what they do, then the task of care. So I don't take it lightly, this pointing. It comes with a warning. But that really, all this stuff that you could add to the process is really, I think, what leads to a bad outcome. That is to have some partial realization that still has identification with someone to be aggrandized is the danger. It's like only half of the non-winning and losing aspect of self-realization is discovered, like only the winning part. And then the losing is disassociated from. So it's like there's still identification with somebody to win, but there's no identification with somebody to lose. When in fact, in discovering the non-self nature of all phenomena experientially, the winning is appreciated, the fortuitous things that happen are appreciated, but they don't tend to then cry out for some building of an empire. There's no need to bottle it up and sell it to everyone. That's why I don't really try to promote this channel anymore. Is that if you stumble upon this and it resonates, great. But otherwise, I'm not trying to build some empire for myself through this. I'm just trying to put out there something that might have helped me. Because energetic awakenings do happen, but they're rare. And one of the difficulties is a lack of corroboration to be found. The internet is helpful in that you can search symptoms, but it's best to hear from people who have gone through the experience and come out on the other side, living a normal life, if such a thing is even possible. My motivation to even talk like this, it requires very certain conditions, like solitude and rest. Otherwise, I just have no impetus to really talk about it. Like if somebody came to me and asked questions, I think I could really expound on it. Otherwise, just to sit, just to go from flat-footed to talking about this other state of being, it's not natural. It's not something that you can easily do just by yourself, You need some kind of direction in which to point at, some inquiry to respond to give direction. But essentially what it boils down to is presence. All this other stuff, all these other sort of spiritual, materialistic trappings are just distraction. All these overly complicated systems, they keep you in the mind. And the mind is this thing, it's like the labyrinth in which awareness is held. It restricts everything to the relative. The relative is always conditional. It makes your state conditional upon certain circumstances. But if there's real presence, then attention is not enveloped. So real presence is really rare. Like I've alluded to this in other videos, that a superlative moment can bring you into pure awareness. It's really just alignment with the mundane, like the boring, whatever's happening right now. If your inner arrangement is a function of alignment with that, then you're not going to be getting triggered, because there's just not going to be engagement of attention with any idea of some opposite, But yeah, these moments that bring pure presence, they're not attributed, the feeling that comes from them is not attributed with that simple alignment. Like if you had this state of being appear to you while you were just sitting there on the couch, you would call that a religious experience. But if you stumble upon a burning car and all of a sudden you feel like your body is getting taken over and you're just acting and pulling people out, those types of dissociative experiences, those are real. People have those. They say, I feel like something took over me and I just did it. And of course everything they do is the right way. Everything works out. But that can be drawn out of a person. But it's also possible to just persist in that mode of experience without any exigent circumstance to draw it forth. And in that, there's an indescribable, perpetual, palpable peace. And it's a stillness. Like the energy body is just allowed to be expansive. And the form and the mind, the body and the mind, they continue to operate as normal. But there are bad outcomes. Like I think a lot of this can come from trauma, right? So trauma builds up and is stored in the body. And in its release, in the letting go of it, in the encountering of it, in the feeling of the feelings that are associated with it and letting them go, in that release, there's the potential for energetic distress, health issues. I can only speak for myself, and I've said it before, but I've always been one to maintain. And so the nervous system is quite used to strenuous, like static holds, resistance training, body weight type exercises, planking, all of these types of things. So it's really I don't try to associate too much like supernatural stuff to this. I do speak in terms of the truth and the spirit of truth, but the term spirit is to denote the subtle. But surely there's a physical aspect to energetic awakening, as evidenced by the different outcomes. So people have just been shaped differently by reality, and a tear in the egoic fabric can have any number of unpredictable effects. So it's like a certain kind of breaking that works out and leaves the person functional in the world, but also blissful. It starts with a noticing of suffering, a noticing of suffering's cause. Suffering really is just unwanted thoughts. If you really just drill down to it, where's your suffering? It's all predicated on what's held in mind, right? Like there's almost 8 billion people, I suppose, on this planet, and many of them are experiencing fates that you would not wish upon anyone. But you are effectively indifferent to it. You have to be, right? Because if you were sensitive to the suffering of everybody in this world in the same way that you would be sensitive to the suffering of, say, your child, right? You would go crazy. So that just demonstrates the prerequisite of identification and attachment to reacting to the state of things. It's all predicated on what's held in mind. So in the predominant state, people work in the real world to bend it to their mind's ideal, and that's normal, and that's what really makes the world go round. But the only real way to persistently come into that alignment is to simply have the same relationship with everything that you have with things that are not in your mind, like the people who you don't know, whose fate you wouldn't wish on anyone, but you don't know about them. That same kind of indifference, but for even that which appears before you. And one would think that indifference would create a coldness, a deadness, but it does not. Because when the fabric of the ego tears and is exposed for its non-self nature, and through this process of letting go of all of the memories that form these blockages, in that process, it's like the energy body becomes unbound and expansive, and its lack of sort of modification or augmentation by the reaction to phenomena allows it to ascend in its vibration, and the highest vibration would be love, and that becomes directionally where it goes. This dispassion is not cultivated through a renunciation of every single thing that arises, but rather the losing identification with that agent, I, that relates to all those things. And once there's a realization of not being the thought I and the body to which it relates, which appears in the awareness you are, when that happens, all of the things in the river keeps going by, like all the thoughts, they all plead their case, but there's just no sense of being the one to which they relate. And that happens as a result of noticing, right? So it starts as this noticing. Why am I suffering? What's causing me to suffer? Well, it's thoughts. And how do I deal with unwanted thoughts? And this is where people go wrong. They, instead of trying to discover the source of suffering, they try to rearrange the thoughts or fulfill them, which it just keeps everything going. There's no way out of that loop in dealing with the content as, just following its orders, following its dictates. But to notice that the source of suffering is thoughts is a correct step. The Buddha said that the source of suffering is desire, or that desire is suffering. But desire is predicated on an idea of how things should be. And in order for that to be, there has to be an identification with one to win these things or lose these things. And that's delusion. That's the fundamental delusion. And that's the delusion that has to be dealt with. Or else any progress that's made will be chalked up to some kind of merit. And just like there's no losing, there's no accumulating of merit either. That is all served up on the plate of I. And as long as that I is given the identity, the mantle of self, then there will be relational thinking. Relational thinking that is believed in the same way that an actor who's deluded could believe they really are their character. But one who knows the non-self nature of I still plays in the play. They just know it's not real. I think I've said enough.